I sat on the couch, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone while Jake flicked through channels. The room felt oddly quiet, almost like a tension hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable, but neither of us said anything about it. I had noticed it for a while now, this distance between us. A gap that had been slowly widening over the months. The excitement, the spark that once defined us, was all but gone. And I couldn't help but feel it in every conversation, every interaction. I was sure Jake felt it too, but neither of us had the courage to bring it up. I wondered, though, if it had always been there, just waiting to be acknowledged. Jake and I had been together for almost 7 years, married for 5. I had always believed that we had something special, something that would last, but lately, it felt as though we were two strangers living under the same roof. I wasn't blind to the way things had changed, but I wasn't ready to face it either. The silence in the room grew heavier. I sighed, letting my phone fall onto the coffee table, feeling the weight of the moment in my chest. I glanced over at Jake. His face was still focused on the TV, his eyes fixed on the screen, but he was so distant. It was as though he wasn't really there, and maybe he wasn't. His mind seemed to be elsewhere, just like mine often was. My thoughts drifted, like they always did when I was left alone with my emotions. I found myself thinking about the past, about the time before Jake and I became so routine. The time when I felt truly seen, truly alive. Michael. My ex. I hadn't thought about him in years, not consciously anyway. But suddenly, the memories came rushing back, vivid, clear. I could still remember the way he made me feel. Alive. Wanted. There was a passion there that I hadn't felt in so long. It wasn't that I didn't love Jake, I did. But love had somehow become something else, something more comfortable, more predictable. The fire had dimmed, and I had never known how to reignite it. I didn't even realize I was speaking out loud until the words left my mouth. I long for the way my ex used to make me feel, I murmured softly. The words slipped out without thought, a whisper in the stillness of the room. I didn't think Jake had heard me at first. I didn't expect him to, honestly. But then I saw his body stiffen, his hand pause mid-reach for the remote control. His eyes, which had been fixed on the TV screen, snapped to me in an instant, wide with surprise. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if time had slowed down. Jake's gaze was locked on me, his face unreadable. I had no idea what he was thinking. "Did you just say that?" he asked quietly, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words I had said, and suddenly, I regretted them. I hadn't meant to say it, not like that, not in front of him. I opened my mouth to explain, to take it back, but nothing came out. I didn't know how to explain something so complicated, something that had been brewing inside me for months, maybe even years. Jake didn't wait for me to respond. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Jake, wait," I started, but he was already walking away, heading toward the door. "I can't do this," he muttered under his breath. "I can't do this anymore." I watched him leave, my chest tightening, my stomach dropping. The door slammed shut behind him, and I sat there, in stunned silence. My heart pounded in my ears, the emptiness of the room suffocating. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the door. It felt like the world had just tilted on its axis, and I was left spinning. Had I really said that? Did I really say those words out loud? It wasn't that I didn't love Jake, I did. But there was something missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And in that moment, I realized just how much I had been ignoring, pushing down, pretending wasn't there. I had built this life with Jake, this comfortable, predictable life, and yet, I had never stopped longing for something more. The weight of what I had just done hit me like a ton of bricks. I had just torn down whatever fragile wall we had built between us, and I wasn't sure if it could be rebuilt. I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapping my arms around them as I rocked back and forth, trying to calm the storm inside of me. What had I done? What had I just unleashed? I tried calling Jake. Once, twice, 3 times. But the phone went straight to voicemail. He wasn't answering. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to, but I also couldn't stop myself from trying. I sat there, waiting, hoping for him to come back. But as the hours passed and the sun set, I began to accept the painful truth. I had no idea what to do next. I knew that whatever had been said couldn't be unsaid. I knew that whatever had just happened was going to change everything between us. And as the night stretched on, I was left with nothing but the echo of my own words in my mind. I longed for the way my ex used to make me feel. I regretted saying it. But at the same time, I wasn't sure it was a regret at all. And in the quiet of that night, I realized I might have just destroyed something that I wasn't sure I even wanted to save. The sun had barely risen the next morning when I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone in disbelief. The little red notification light was still blinking, taunting me with unanswered texts and missed calls. All from Jake. But there was nothing from him since he had stormed out last night. It was almost as if he had disappeared, and the silence that filled our house was unbearable. I tried to stay busy, making coffee and getting dressed for work, but it all felt pointless. How could I focus on anything when my mind kept returning to what had happened? The words I had said, those damn words that had slipped out so carelessly, kept echoing in my head. I longed for the way my ex used to make me feel. That was what I had said. And now, here I was, struggling to understand what had possessed me to speak those words aloud. I had always told myself that the past was behind me, that I had moved on from Michael. But had I? As the minutes ticked by, it became clearer, I hadn't moved on at all. Michael had been the first man to make me feel truly alive, to make me feel seen in a way that no one else ever had. It wasn't just the passion, the wild chemistry we'd shared. It was the way he made me feel like I was the center of his world, as though nothing else mattered except the two of us. That had been intoxicating. That had been what I missed. But Jake? With Jake, it was different. Comfortable, yes. Reliable. But somewhere along the way, it had become too safe. Too easy. And I wasn't sure when I started to feel suffocated by it, but I knew now that I had been for a long time. Had I been trying to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore? Or had I just convinced myself that this was all I deserved? I let out a heavy sigh and glanced at the clock. I had to leave for work soon. I couldn't just sit here wallowing in guilt and confusion. But every step felt heavy, like I was walking through thick mud. How could I go through with my day when my marriage was falling apart? The drive to work was a blur, my thoughts constantly returning to Jake. What was he doing? Was he even thinking about me? Or was he so angry that he didn't care anymore? I pulled into the parking lot and parked the car, staring at the office building in front of me. I felt like a fraud, walking in as if nothing had happened, as if everything was fine. But it wasn't. I was falling apart inside. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to get some work done, but the constant buzz of my phone, the desperate hope that it would be Jake calling, only made it worse. When lunchtime came, I couldn't take it any longer. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, hoping for a moment of peace, away from the chaos of my thoughts. The screen lit up with a message from Lily, my best friend. She had always been there for me, always the one who knew how to make me laugh when life felt like too much. But today, I couldn't help but feel that her message was a reminder of everything I had been avoiding. Are you okay? You didn't respond last night. Talk to me. I read the message over and over again, but I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't okay. I wasn't even close. And how could I explain to her what had happened? What could I possibly say? Finally, I tapped out a reply. I don't know what I've done, Lil. I waited. Minutes later, the reply came, come over tonight. We'll talk. Don't worry, okay? I've got you. I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. Lily always knew what to say, even when I didn't have the words. I shoved my phone into my bag and forced myself to focus on the rest of the workday, but it was nearly impossible. All I could think about was Jake. Where was he? What was he doing? Why wasn't he answering my calls? When the workday finally ended, I rushed home, desperate to get to Lily's. I threw on a pair of jeans and a hoodie, not caring how I looked. I just needed to get out of the house, away from the haunting silence of our empty bedroom. Lily lived in a small apartment across town, a cozy little place that always felt like a sanctuary. She greeted me at the door with her usual warmth, pulling me into a tight hug. "You're not okay, are you?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. She didn't wait for me to answer. She knew. I collapsed onto her couch, my hands shaking. I don't know what happened, Lily. I just said it. I didn't mean to, but it's true. I miss how Michael made me feel. Lily sat beside me, her eyes filled with concern. You miss that feeling, not Michael. You're not in love with him anymore. I know you, Amelia. This is about more than just him. I wiped my eyes, not realizing I had started to cry. But what if it's not? What if I'm still holding on to something that I shouldn't? What if I'm not really in love with Jake anymore? I don't even know what I want. Lily sighed, taking my hand in hers. You need to figure that out. But you can't do it by pretending everything's fine. You've got to be honest with yourself, even if it hurts. You're not the same person you were when you and Jake first got together. And neither is he. The weight of her words sank in. I had been running from the truth for so long, trying to convince myself that everything was okay, that everything could still be fixed. But maybe it was time to stop pretending. Maybe it was time to face what I had been avoiding for so long. I looked up at Lily, her face filled with understanding. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lily squeezed my hand. You figure it out, one step at a time. And whatever happens, I'm here. But you've got to make the choice. You can't keep living like this. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words press down on me. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure, I had to stop running from myself. And maybe, just maybe, I had to stop running from Jake. The days after that night dragged on, each one blurring into the next. Jake didn't come home. I hadn't heard from him. I kept telling myself that he needed space, that maybe he was processing what I'd said, but each unanswered call, each moment of silence, twisted something inside me. I knew I had hurt him. I hadn't just made a careless comment, I had opened a door to something much deeper, something I didn't even fully understand myself. I went through the motions of life. I went to work, greeted my coworkers, and answered emails, but nothing felt real. It was as if I was living in a fog, pretending everything was fine while my heart ached with every passing second. There were times when I would see couples laughing together, holding hands, and I would feel a pang in my chest, a longing for something I couldn't quite grasp. I wasn't sure what it was anymore. All I knew was that I wasn't where I wanted to be. Lily checked in on me every day. She was the one person who kept me grounded, even if I wasn't ready to admit what I was feeling. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the full truth, though. I couldn't put into words what was happening inside me. Every time I thought I might be close to understanding it, I'd get lost in the confusion again. It was Friday when I decided to go through with it. I couldn't keep waiting, hoping for Jake to come to me. I needed to talk to him. I had no idea what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I drove home after work, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. What if he still hated me? What if he couldn't forgive me? The possibilities terrified me, but staying in silence was worse. When I got home, I didn't expect to find him there. I wasn't sure what I expected, to be honest. I'd almost convinced myself that he wouldn't come back. But as I walked into the living room, my breath caught in my throat. There he was, sitting on the couch, his face tense, his eyes avoiding mine. "Jake," I whispered, my voice breaking the heavy silence. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of how to begin. "You came back," I finally said, feeling like an idiot as the words escaped me. I sounded like I was trying to convince myself that this was real. He sighed, leaning back into the couch. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with something I couldn't place. "I needed time. I needed to think." I nodded, unsure of what to say next. "Jake, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to hear that. It was just a thought, something stupid that came out of my mouth. But it's not what I meant. I swear." He was silent for a moment, studying me with a look that sent a chill down my spine. "You said it, though. And I heard it. You miss how someone else made you feel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I winced, feeling the sting of his words. He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what I had said. But there was more to it. There had to be more to it. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said, my voice cracking as I sat down beside him. "I'm sorry. I just don't know where we are anymore. I've been feeling like this for a while, and I didn't know how to say it. It's not just about Michael. It's about me. I feel stuck." Jake turned to look at me, his eyes softening just a fraction. "You've been distant. I've felt it for months now. But I never thought it was because of him," he said, his voice edged with frustration. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me that something was wrong?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I explain the growing sense of dissatisfaction, the yearning for something more? I didn't know how, I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I didn't know how to tell you that I've been feeling like we're not the same anymore. That we're not the same." Jake's face softened, but there was still a sadness in his eyes. "So you were thinking about him? About Michael?" he asked, his voice distant now, the edge returning. "Is that what this is about? You still miss him?" "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "It's not just about him. It's not. I miss how he made me feel, yes. But I miss feeling alive. I miss the feeling of being wanted, of being excited. I miss feeling like I was someone. I've felt like I've been fading into the background for too long." Jake looked away, his jaw tightening. So you're telling me that I'm the problem now? His voice had an edge, something sharp in it, and I could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface. That everything's my fault? No. I cried, reaching for his hand. No, it's not your fault. I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just that I've been so lost. And I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to ask for more. He pulled his hand away, standing up and walking to the window, his back to me. I don't know what to say anymore, he muttered, his voice tinged with exhaustion. I thought we had something. I thought I was enough for you. You are, I said, rising to my feet. You're more than enough. But I haven't been enough for myself, Jake. I've been looking for something outside of me, when I should have been looking inward. I've been pretending that everything was fine, and it wasn't. I'm sorry. Jake turned around, his eyes meeting mine, but the hurt in them was undeniable. I don't know if I can just forget what you said, he said quietly. I don't know if I can just pretend that things are fine after this. I felt my heart break as his words sank in. I knew I had crossed a line. I knew I had hurt him in a way that couldn't be undone. But I also knew that I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. I couldn't keep hiding from the truth, not anymore. I don't want to pretend anymore, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I want to figure this out. I want us to figure this out. But I don't know where to start. Jake stared at me for a long time, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. Maybe we need some time apart. Maybe we both need to figure out what we really want. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. Maybe you're right. As he walked out the door, I felt a tear slip down my cheek. This wasn't the end, but it felt like it could be. And that thought, more than anything else, terrified me. The days after Jake left were the quietest I had ever experienced. The house that once felt like home, full of conversation and shared routines, now felt like an empty shell. I tried to keep busy, filling the silence with work, with going out, with anything that might keep my mind from returning to the painful truth. But it always did. Every single time. I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to be doing. I had told myself, over and over again, that the time apart would help us figure things out, but in reality, it only gave me more time to think. More time to question myself, to question us, and most of all, to question whether or not we were even meant to be together anymore. I had tried to convince myself that I missed the old feeling, the one I'd had with Michael, that thrilling, heart-racing connection, but I was starting to realize it wasn't just the feeling that I had been craving. I had been looking for something outside myself, something to fill a hole that had been growing inside of me for a long time. But when the excitement faded, when the fantasies of a perfect life collapsed, I was left with a much harder question: who was I, really? And what did I want out of life, out of love? I reached for my phone one evening, as I had done countless times before, but this time, I didn't stop myself. I opened the contact list, and there it was. Jake's name, right at the top. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the call button, but for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to press it. What would I say? How could I apologize for everything? I had spent so long telling myself I didn't need to explain myself to him, that I had a right to feel what I felt, but now, sitting alone in the silence of our home, I realized just how much I had to say. I had missed him. Not just the comfortable version of him I had come to rely on, but the man who had once made me feel loved, wanted. I didn't know where he had gone. Somewhere along the way, we had both lost each other, lost ourselves, and I wasn't sure if we could ever get back to what we once had. I put the phone down with a sigh, sinking into the couch. My mind wandered to the night he left. His words, his anger, the pain in his eyes when he walked out. It felt like it had all happened so fast, like one wrong step had set off a chain of events that neither of us could undo. But maybe that was the thing. Maybe things couldn't just go back to the way they were, and maybe they shouldn't. Maybe we both needed to change. A soft knock on the door broke my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer it. When I opened the door, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There stood Jake, standing there, holding a small bag of takeout in one hand and his eyes full of uncertainty. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice soft but steady. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't know what to say. The flood of emotions hit me all at once: relief, fear, hope, regret, and I stood there frozen, trying to process it all. He looked at me, waiting for some kind of reaction, his expression cautious. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, almost to himself. I couldn't stay away. I've been thinking about everything we talked about. And I realized, I don't want to lose you. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words failed me. I was afraid to say the wrong thing again, to push him away with something I didn't mean. But then I stepped forward, pulling the door open wider, and nodded. "Come in," I said softly, my voice shaking slightly. "Let's talk." We sat on the couch, the bag of takeout between us, but neither of us reached for it. There was something heavier in the air, something that had to be said before either of us could move on. I felt like I had been holding my breath for days, weeks, maybe even months. And now, with him sitting next to me, I realized just how much I had been holding in. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't even realize how much I was hurting myself until you left. I don't know what's happened to us, but I don't want to lose you." Jake sighed deeply, leaning back against the couch. He closed his eyes for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot too," he said quietly. "And I realized something. I've been scared, Amelia. Scared that maybe I'm not enough for you. That maybe I haven't been enough for a long time." My heart broke at his words, at the vulnerability in his voice. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Jake, you're more than enough. You've always been enough. But I haven't been honest with you, with myself. I've been so caught up in what I thought I needed, that I didn't even see what was right in front of me." He turned to look at me, his expression softening. "I don't know what the future holds, Amelia. But I do know one thing: I want to try. I want us to try." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mixed with a profound sense of fear. Trying meant that we had to be vulnerable again, to face the things that had driven us apart. It meant facing the possibility that we might fail again. But it also meant that there was still something worth fighting for. "I want that too," I said, my voice steady now. "I want to try. But we can't go back to what we had before. We can't pretend that nothing happened. We have to be honest with each other, even when it's hard." Jake nodded, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity that made my chest tighten. "I agree. We have to be real with each other. And we can't fix everything overnight. But we can start by being honest." I felt something shift between us then. A quiet understanding, a mutual recognition that we had both been broken, but that we could try to rebuild, piece by piece. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were finally on the same page. As we sat there, the quiet of the room felt different. It wasn't suffocating anymore. It was filled with possibility, with the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make it work. Together. Jake leaned forward then, offering me the takeout bag. "Dinner?" he asked with a tentative smile, his voice laced with the hint of the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. I smiled back, my heart lighter than it had been in days. Dinner sounds perfect. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. Together, in the messy, imperfect present, trying to make sense of the past and build something better for the future.